A while back I posted a video where I featured the design and construction details of a sofa table that I made for a customer. Well, I'm going to do the same type of thing in this video, only with this small bench that has a drawer underneath it. This is a gift from my girlfriend. It was recently her birthday, and this is going to go with her loom. She usually just uses a little rolly office chair for weaving, but I made her this little weaving bench. It'll be a nice fit. It has a simple utilitarian design which sort of matches a loom, so I thought it would be a good fit. It's going to end up having a painted seat, but before I painted this seat, I wanted to go over its design and construction details so that everything would be a little more clear and not have paint covering anything up. So let's take a closer look. When it comes to the design of the bench, it is indeed very simple, as I already stated. It's going with a loom, which is a utilitarian thing in itself, but it has all the parts and components that imply its function and the fact that it moves, and it's sort of a contraption. So, but it's sort of like a bridge or a hand plane or certain boats. In some cases, they're not always designed aesthetically, but just the nature of the object. It is a nice, pleasing design, and that's sort of what I was going for in this bench. If I turn it at an angle, you can sort of start to see the splay of the legs. It is a 10-degree angle, and then it's sort of playing around with the different scales of things. The top is slightly thinner than the legs. The legs are about 1.5 inches thick, with the top being 1.25 inches thick. So there's slight variances to where everything doesn't have that. It's made out of a 2x4 look. That is often very easily avoided. A lot of people will make these 2x4 type or construction grade lumber type projects, and they just look like that. They end up looking like cargo furniture, and that is a very easy thing to avoid with some very slight changes in dimension and scale from component to component within the piece of furniture. So for example, this is 1.25 inches thick, 1.5 inches thick, 1 inch thick. So a 1/4 inch difference between each of those things really does add a lot. And then further down from that, the drawer underneath, the walls of this were 3/4 inch. So you got 3/4 inch, 1.25 inch, 1.5 inch. And that is just as simple as ripping these pieces and planing them to different thicknesses. If you don't have a planer, you'll have a slightly more difficult time, but you don't always need to start out with something like a 2x4. A lot of times in these projects, people just stick to just 2x4s when you've got stacks of 2x6s, 8s, 10s, and 12s right beside them. And you can get some pretty nice lumber, especially when it comes to 2x12s. If you start out with a 2x12, normally they're sawn right out of the center of the tree. So you'll have the heart of the tree right in the center, and then basically quarter sawn boards off to the sides. So if you start with a 2x12, you can rip that center out and end up with 2 quarter sawn pieces of pine, and in some cases it can be extremely nice lumber. You do need to make sure that the wood is dry enough to use in a piece of furniture. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Movement won't make much of a difference. For example, like in the lower framework of this bench, the components are small enough and short enough, and then once put into that framework, even if there is sort of some movement wants to happen, the framework will hold it stiff. But for example, in this top piece, if this was still pretty wet, the top could curve or cup or even crack. So you want to make sure that your piece of wood is as stable as possible just by letting it sit around, perhaps inside of your air-conditioned home, for as long as possible before you actually go to using it. So let's talk a little bit more about its design. The bench measures 24 inches long, 11 inches wide, like I said, 1.25 inches thick seat. It stands 17 inches off of the floor, with the lower part, the legs being ripped out of a 2x12, so they start out at about 1.5 inches, but I do plane each side of the octagonal shape that I rip on them on the table saw. The little rails between the legs are also octagonal, but they started out as a 1-inch board, ripped them to an octagon, and then ran them through the planer on each face of that octagon. The legs are splayed out at a 10-degree angle. This joint is done on a drill press, and then the holes are shaped to a taper with this reamer that I made. So when it comes to a design, like I said, it's very simple. There's not a whole lot to talk about. There is a slight angle cut on the ends of these. At first it was just that blunt 90-degree cut, and it didn't quite have the look that I wanted, but I didn't want to do anything fancy like cut a curve an outside curve or an inside curve into this. Just that slight little, I think it was a 7-degree angle. A 10-degree angle looked a little too steep, and 5 was a little too shallow, so I went with about a 7, and I like the way that looked. All I did is cut it on a scrap piece of board and held it over top the framework until I liked the way it looked. This little bench, as you can see, does have a function to it, and that is not only to sit on, but it has some storage underneath. And that in itself is sort of really utilitarian look. It's not too fancy with the way it's hanging in there. It's just these little drawer guides added into it, and that keeps this drawer hanging down about a 1/16 from the underside of the bench seat. And the drawer itself, let's see, I don't even remember what its measurement is. It is about 4 3/4 inches tall and measures 10 deep and 13 wide. The walls of this drawer are 3/4 of an inch. Started out as a untreated decking board, so basically a 1x6 that I planed down and then added, constructed it using dovetails. It has 3 large dovetails visible from the side, and then as you can see there is that groove routed down the sides, and that is what slides on the drawer guide that is underneath. The bottom of the drawer is a solid panel. I recently had a question in one of the comments about how to put a, how do you put a bottom in a box, and a drawer is basically a box without a top. So this is the answer to those who are wondering that. This is a solid panel that is 2 glued up pieces of the same material that I made the sides of the box out of. This whole piece is made out of southern yellow pine. So how I achieved this is first I glued up a panel. So it measured, I guess, about 12 inches wide and about 16 inches long. Once the glue dried, I ran it through the planer down to 3/4 of an inch thick. I took the sides of the drawer and routed a 1/2 inch groove around the inside, a 1/4 inch from that bottom edge. Then I took that panel, cut it to size to where it would fit inside the grooves, and then went to the table saw and tilted my table saw blade, I don't even know what angle it was, probably something around a 7 to 10 degree angle, and then ripped off the sides of that panel, beveling them down to a 1/2 inch. So then once I construct this box, it sort of just traps this panel in the inside, and those bevels are on the bottom, making the inside totally flat. And since they are tapered and tapered to the inside of that panel, the outside edge I mean, when you're sliding that panel in and you fit the dovetails together, it really seals up those edges nicely, and you don't end up with any kind of gaps. And one thing you do need to account for in the sort of the construction is that you want a little bit of expansion room in that panel. So so just over time it's pushing back and forth a little bit. If it was super tight and it expanded, it could bust your box open. It would take quite a bit. It probably wouldn't actually bust it, but it could cause some sort of issues with it. Another aspect of the drawer that I'll go ahead and comment on before I forget is the way that it hangs underneath the bench. I didn't want to make the rails down at the bottom. I wanted them at the top for 2 reasons. I wanted them to be a little more low profile, hanging underneath the bench seat, but by making it hang, any sort of expansion and contraction of the drawer is less noticeable, and it won't if it was, for example, if it was hanging underneath the bench seat and the rails were on the bottom and it expanded, it might push up into the underside of that bench seat, making it too tight to slide back and forth. Since it slides at the top, any expansion goes down and away from the top, meaning that the drawer will never end up tight underneath there. I've done some other drawers where it's sort of trapped into an area and ended up expanding, and I ended up later having to trim down the height of the drawer, but I won't end up with any situation like that. So this whole bench could be used outside or inside, and the expansion and contraction wouldn't phase the drawer at all. So when it comes to design, that pretty much finishes it up. It's utilitarian. I'm not hiding from any sort of function. You can see the glides in the drawers. You can see the ends of the dovetails. If you didn't want that, you could put a drawer front on the front of this, say something out of a different type of wood that will sort of finish it off. But if it did have a drawer front, that would probably impede, unless you accounted for it in your design, the fact that the drawer goes through both sides. Wanted it that way to where it was just sort of an added function of using it. Since it's going to be used at a loom, you're going to be sitting with your legs hanging off one side, using different tools, and you can just drop them in here and then put it back in while you're using it. But then if you ran into the room from the other side and needed to grab something, you can pull it out that way. So it's just added function. You don't want anything in the design when it comes to a functional piece of furniture like this that would hinder its use in any way. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at some of the ways that I constructed this piece. I'm going to quickly go over some of the construction points in this piece and then go back and refocus on some of the more interesting details. First of all, we already talked about the drawer, but in general it is just a simple dovetailed construction, 3 dovetails in each within this about 4.5 to 4 3/4 inch side pieces. I cut my dovetails using a saw, so they're all hand cut, and I have a separate video if you'd like to see my method for doing dovetails. It's very simple and doesn't cost too much, using some pretty inexpensive tools. And I already talked about how the panel goes in the bottom of that box. In general, this is a simple framework construction like any chair, sort of like a ladder back style chair or similar type to Windsor construction, with just the round peg going in the round hole. When it comes to the legs going into the top, they go through tapered holes. First they're drilled on a drill press and then tapered with a little handmade reamer. On the underside, for the drawer itself, these simple little pieces that the drawer slides on, and that pretty much wraps everything up. The legs themselves are octagonal, ripped on the table saw, same for the rails, and these tapers for these tapered holes are turned on the lathe. So let's go and talk very quickly a little bit about how some of these techniques are achieved. First, we'll talk about the drilling of the holes for the seat blank. I use this simple jig that I made for the drill press. This mounts on the table of the drill press. I tilt the table to the drill press at a slight angle, clamp this down, and then drill these holes with the seat upside down. So pretty much I take that seat blank with this on the drill press and fit that right into that 45-degree notch you see there. Well, it's a 90-degree notch turned at 45 degrees to a center line. And what this is for is to where I can drill the holes on the corners of each bench, whether I'm making 1 bench or 100 benches, and it always drills them in the same position. And I have the drill press table tilted to about a 10-degree angle. And these legs, as you can see, are splayed both up this way and out this way. So it's a compound splay, or whatever you want to call it. It's angled at 45 degrees from that 90-degree corner. So that is the purpose of sort of the orientation of this angle to a center line through your jig. I use, I believe, 1 1/8 or 1 1/4 Forstner bit, and then go back and taper those holes with my reamer. And I talk a little more about this reamer in my video where I show the construction of my shave horse. So you can go and hear a little bit more about that. But basically I turned this on the lathe to the same taper as a keyhole saw blade with the teeth filed off, and sharpen it just like a cabinet scraper. And the sides of this scraper, the blade here, hang out from the sides just enough to scrape the inside of that hole to this taper. And that taper is the same taper that I turn onto the ends of these octagonal legs. For those, I just have this little small block of wood where I drilled a hole and then tapered it with the reamer and then cut through the center of that hole. Then I'm able to take that and fit it to that taper as I'm turning it, and then once I get it to fit in here, it'll fit these sockets. The legs are octagonal. That's all done on the table saw. I start out with some 1.5 inch thick material. Basically it's a 2x12 that I've ripped into 1.5 by 1.5 little blanks, and then rip off the corners on the table saw. So that's pretty much how the legs are done. And just getting your mind around the angles sometimes is a little tricky, but if you sit there and think about it and take your time and do some sample pieces, you're good to go. That's one good thing about using inexpensive materials, and in this case it was all scrap material, so you're not out the big money if you mess up some piece of walnut or whatever else you're using. For these lower rails, they start out as 1 inch material. They're untreated decking boards that I ripped to 1 inch by 1 inch little blanks, and then I make them octagonal on the table saw, the same as the legs. For the angles on the, this is where it gets a little tricky sounding. I might even screw up with the way I'm explaining this, but it's a 10-degree angle into the top, but this angle from here to there is a 5-degree angle, I think, because it's doing something funny. It's hard to explain now, but basically these are just the holes for the lower rails are just round. They're not tapered, but it's a very tight joint. And what I do is, after I've ripped these rails on the table saw, I take them to my shave horse and I bring them down to a taper just on the end to fit into those sockets. And a combination of what I do first is I jam them in the hole and I kind of ream them around a little bit, and that compresses the wood to fit in that. And then I'll apply glue onto the inside of that joint and then jam it in there. And then once that wet glue gets on that compressed wood, it'll expand and it really tightens in, and then it's glued also. So the construction of a little bench like this is super strong. And the tops of the legs are also wedged. So what I do is I'll mark underneath the bench right here, right where the leg enters the underside of the bench, and then I'll take a ruler and place my ruler across both of the end grain parts of the tops of the legs and draw a line right through the center. Then pull them out and take my little handsaw and make a groove down to that pencil mark that I made on the bottom of the leg. And then using some sort of hardwood wedge, I think I used maple in this case, just pound that in there, and that expands it further. The reason you want to make your cut this way for the wedging is if you wedged them this way, it could split the wood really easily. Doing it this way, the wood has a lot of strength when it presses out in that direction. So that's definitely the way you want to go about that. One thing I forgot to mention real quick, I'll go back and point out, when I'm drilling the holes for these legs, one thing you don't want to have happen is you'll have your table, say this is the table of your drill press, and you've got your legs laying across it. Any sort of rotation of the legs in this angle will change the angle itself and have one of your rails shooting off to the side, perhaps like coming out to about right here, instead of in line with your other hole. So by making this simple jig right here that fits on the legs, you can get this clamped and 90 degree to your drill press table, which needs to be, I guess what you call it, in line with the top of the, you want your table square, then you square this to your table, and then the legs laid down in that groove. And then all you need to do is align the spur of your Forstner bit up with marks that you've already done on your legs, and once again you'll be drilling everything very consistent regardless of how many legs you're making. So a piece like this is not so much that it takes a long time to actually make it, it's just the setup takes a while. So really you can, in the time that it takes you to make, basically what I'm saying is if you make one bench, it's going to take a long time because the majority of your time is in setup. But the best way to go about it is to, if you have a reason, is to make multiple benches at once. You could make 10 of these benches in not too much more time than it takes you to make one, since most of the time is in setup and not so much in the construction. That pretty much wraps up, I think, most of the construction stuff. The legs, I didn't mention this, they're ripped on the table saw, and then I run them back through the planer, smoothing up each side. Same for the rails. I flush cut the tops of those the tops of the legs that protrude through the top when you knock the legs into the seat with a little flush cut saw, and then I just sand the tops with a belt sander. This bench is going to be painted, so any sort of little dents or imperfections in the pine I fill in with wood filler, and it makes everything nice and smooth. Sometimes it seems like a little bit of a shame to cover up these joints, and I guess in your piece you don't have to, but I like the simple look of having a little painted seat with the raw bottom, which I'm going to do polyurethane on that. Not 100% sure what color I'm painting the top, but I'll hopefully post that picture in the end of this video, or either in a following video or on Facebook. But I think that pretty much wraps it up. This is a gift for my girlfriend, and I'm sure she'll like it. She really likes it when I make little gifts like this. This goes along with her loom for weaving, which is something she really enjoys doing. Currently she just uses a rolly office chair, so this will be a nice little thing. I've already made her some different shuttles and other little contraptions that she uses with her fiber arts, and this will be a nice addition into her little weaving studio. So I hope this video was helpful. If you'd like to see more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and you will get updates when I post future uploads. You can also follow me on Facebook where I post updates from the channel, different photos, and make announcements and so on. If you'd like to support the channel, go ahead and subscribe. I already mentioned that. Well, give the videos a thumbs up, leave a comment, all that kind of stuff. And if you'd like, you can share the videos with your friends and other people that you would find this types of topics interesting. With all that said, I guess I just want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Yes, come out.
Come on.
A weaving bench! Weaving!
A weaving bench.
A weaving chair with a drawer. Oh, shoot.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. Huh?
After you give the video a thumbs up and leave a comment, please click the red subscribe button now if you're not already a subscriber, and you will get updates when I post future videos. Thanks for watching. See you next time.